The holographic display floating above Wu Jin's simple device showed star maps that made the entire Galaxy Council chamber go completely silent. The mathematical equations and hyperspace calculations were so advanced that even the smartest aliens in the room had to look twice to make sure they were seeing correctly. Counselor Dex of the Nexari was the first to speak. His crystal body flickered with confusion and his voice sounded like breaking glass. "This is impossible," he said. "These hyperspace routes should not exist according to our understanding of physics. Some of these paths go through areas of space we consider completely impassable." The display rotated slowly, showing different angles of the star charts. The routes were marked in bright blue lines that cut through dangerous regions of space that every other species had learned to avoid. They went through asteroid fields that could destroy ships, through radiation zones that killed crews, through gravitational anomalies that crushed vessels. "How did you acquire this information?" demanded Speaker Veltar. His beautiful musical voice now carried a sharp edge of suspicion and growing alarm. "The Vortani have been mapping hyperspace for over 3,000 years. We have never seen routes like these." Wu Jin stood calmly beside his device, watching the faces of the council members change from mockery to confusion to amazement. He had prepared for this moment for months, studying every species in the room, learning their weaknesses, their fears, their desires. "We discovered it ourselves," he said simply. "While you have been dismissing us as primitive, we have been working. Human scientists, engineers, and mathematicians have been studying the galaxy not from the perspective of advanced beings who take their knowledge for granted, but from the ground up." The display changed to show comparative analysis between human discoveries and existing council knowledge. The results were shocking. In several key areas of hyperspace navigation, human understanding had already moved far beyond anything the council possessed. Sometimes, Wu Jin continued, a fresh perspective can see things that experienced eyes miss. We call it beginner's mind in our culture. When you are not limited by preconceptions about what is possible, you often find solutions that others overlook. The massive Gorlick representative leaned forward, his stone body grinding against his seat. "How long have you known about these routes?" he asked in his voice like grinding rock. 6 months for the first ones," Wu Jin replied. 2 weeks ago, we discovered 12 more. We estimate there are at least 50 similar routes throughout the galaxy that remain unexplored by other species." The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Trade routes that had been established for thousands of years could be cut in half. Journeys that took months could be completed in weeks. The economic advantages were beyond calculation. Several council members began whispering urgently among themselves. The Chitauri were clicking so rapidly it sounded like static. The plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves in patterns that showed extreme agitation. Even the usually calm gas beings were swirling in tight, excited spirals. But Speaker Veltar was not ready to admit that his species had been wrong. He straightened his elegant form and spoke with forced confidence. "Even if this is true, one breakthrough does not make you equal to civilizations that have conquered the stars." For millennia, Wu Jin nodded thoughtfully as if he had expected this exact response. "You are absolutely right," he said. "One breakthrough does not make us equals." He paused, letting the words hang in the air while he reached back into his briefcase. The council members watched with growing tension as he pulled out another device, this one slightly larger than the first. "That is why I brought several more," he said, placing the second device next to the first. When he activated it, the holographic display expanded, showing energy readings that made the chamber's atmospheric processors hum with the sudden intake of breath from multiple species. The data showed power generation methods that were not only more efficient than anything the council used, but also completely clean and seemingly unlimited. The numbers were staggering. The energy output readings were 10 times higher than the best fusion reactors in the galaxy. The efficiency ratings were perfect with zero waste products. The fuel source appeared to be something that existed everywhere in unlimited quantities. "This cannot be real," whispered a Chitauri representative, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic display in thousands of tiny fragments. "No species has ever achieved energy generation at these levels." Wu Jin gestured to the display where complex diagrams showed the inner workings of the human energy systems. "Fusion energy has been the foundation of galactic civilization for thousands of years," he explained, "but we have Moved beyond fusion, we have learned to harness the quantum foam that exists in empty space itself. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications became clear. Every cubic meter of vacuum space contained enormous amounts of energy locked. In quantum fluctuations, it was theoretical knowledge that every advanced species understood, but none had ever figured out how to use. We have just figured out how to tap into it safely. Wu Jin continued. Every empty region of space becomes a potential power source. A single cubic kilometer of vacuum contains enough energy to power a planet for a century. They council members sat in their seats like statues, barely breathing. Energy scarcity had driven galactic politics for millennial. Wars had been fought over fusion fuel deposits. Entire species had been enslaved to work in energy mines. The balance of power between civilizations was based on who controlled the best energy sources, and now this small human in his simple blue suit was telling them that energy could be harvested from empty space itself. The political, economic, and social implications were beyond comprehension. The Nexari counselor Thex spoke first, his crystal form pulsing with excited light. If this technology is real, he said, it would change everything. Every species, every world, every civilization would need to reconsider their entire way of life. The Gorlick representative rumbled in agreement. Wars would become pointless, he said, if every world could generate unlimited clean energy. The entire structure of galactic civilization would need to be rebuilt. Speaker Veltar looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of beings who had just realized their understanding of the universe had been completely overturned. His musical voice was much quieter when he spoke again. What other technologies does humanity possess, he asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. Wu Jin smiled, that same small, mysterious smile he had worn since the beginning. Several more, he said, reaching for his briefcase again, but perhaps we should discuss the treatment humanity has received from this council before we continue. The mood in the chamber shifted again. The same beings who had been laughing at humanity minutes earlier now realized they might have made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They had dismissed, ignored, and mocked a species that had quietly revolutionized physics, energy production, and space travel. Small human in the blue suit was no longer the subject of their mockery. He had become the most important person in the room, and everyone knew it. For the first time in council history, the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds waited in complete silence for a human to decide what would happen next. The giant crystal dome of the Galaxy Council building was huge and bright. The morning light from 3 different suns came through the walls and made rainbow colors dance across the floor. Inside the massive round room, thousands of alien beings sat in their special seats waiting for the weekly meeting to start. Kim Wu Jin walked slowly through the main entrance carrying a simple, black briefcase. He wore a plain blue suit that looked very ordinary compared to the fancy clothes and natural beauty of the other species around him. He was not tall or strong-looking, just a regular human man with dark hair and calm eyes. The other aliens barely looked at him as he made his way to the small human section near the back of the room. The Vortani were tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to glow in the light. They had long, graceful necks and moved like dancers. Their clothes looked like they were made of liquid metal that flowed around their bodice. Next to them sat the massive Gorlick, who looked like living mountains made of gray rock. Their eyes glowed red like coals, and when they breathed it sounded like distant thunder. Each one was 3 times bigger than any human, and their stone fingers could probably crush steel. The insect like Chitauri made clicking sounds with their mouth parts as they talked to each other. They had shiny black bodies with 6 arms, and their heads moved in quick, jerky motions like real insects. Their compound eyes reflected light in strange patterns. The blue crystal Nexari sat perfectly still like beautiful statues. Their bodies were see-through, and light passed through them in amazing ways. When they spoke, their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze all around the room. Other species filled the seats. Some looked like plants that could walk and talk. Others were made of what seemed like living gas that held a shape. Some had too many eyes or arms or legs. There were beings made of pure energy, and others that looked like they were carved from different colored stones. Wu Jin found his seat in the small human section and sat down quietly. He opened his briefcase and took out a tablet and some papers. He did not try to talk to anyone else, and no one tried to talk to him. This was normal. The other species treated humans like they were not really important as. The meeting was about to start. The huge doors at the front of the room opened with a deep sound like a bell. A figure walked out onto the central platform. This was the Speaker of the Council today. It was Veltar from the Vortani species. Veltar was even more impressive than the other Vortani. He was taller, and his silver skin seemed to shine brighter. His voice filled the entire room without needing any machines to make it louder. Welcome, honored members of the Galaxy Council, he said in his musical voice. Today we have much important business to discuss. Trade agreements between the Andromeda sectors, resource sharing protocols for the Outer Rim worlds, and of course the usual requests from our smaller member species. When he said smaller member species, his eyes looked directly at Wu Jin, and several other aliens made sounds that were clearly meant to be laughter. The Vortani made beautiful musical trilling sounds. The Gorlick rumbled like rocks falling down a mountain. The Chitauri clicked their mouth parts rapidly. Wu Jin did not react to the laughter. He just sat quietly and listened as the meeting began. The first item was a trade dispute between two major species. The Council spent almost an hour discussing it, carefully considering every detail and possible solution. The second item was about mining rights in a star system that had valuable crystals. Again, the Council gave it serious attention, asking many questions and making sure everyone understood the agreement. Then came the requests from smaller species. A plant-like race called the Verdani wanted permission to expand their territory. The Council approved it quickly. Without much discussion, a gas-being species needed help with their atmospheric processors. The Council immediately offered resources and expert help. Finally, it was time for the human requests. Wu Jin stood up slowly and walked to the speaking area. In the center of the room, he could feel thousands of eyes watching him and hear the quiet sounds of aliens whispering to each other. Honored Council members, he began, his voice steady and clear. I am Kim Wu Jin, the new representative from Earth. I come before you today to request fair consideration for several important matters. The whispering grew louder, and some aliens made sounds that were clearly amused. Speaker Veltar held up one elegant hand for silence. Please continue, human, he said. Though his tone suggested he was not really interested, Wu Jin looked around the room, making eye contact with as many beings as possible. First, he said, humanity requests equal trading rights with other Council species. We have valuable resources and products that could benefit many worlds. Before he could continue, Speaker Veltar interrupted him. What could your species possibly offer to civilizations that have been traveling between stars for thousands of years? Your people have barely left your home planet. The chamber erupted in laughter again. This time it was louder and more mocking. The Vortani trilled their musical laughs. The Gorlick rumbled with what sounded like rocks grinding together. The Chitauri clicked so fast it sounded like rain on a metal roof. Even species that usually stayed quiet joined in. The crystal Nexari shimmered in a way that meant they were amused. The plant-like beings rustled their leaves. The gas beings swirled in patterns that showed they thought it was funny. Wu Jin waited patiently for the laughter to die down. He did not look angry or upset. He just stood there with a small smile on his face, as if he knew something they did not. Second, he continued when it was quiet enough. Humanity requests the right to establish colonies in unclaimed systems. We have identified several worlds that could support human life more. Laughter filled the room. Speaker Veltar shook his head in what looked like pity. Young human, he said, your species cannot even build ships that travel faster than light. How could you possibly establish colonies in other star systems? The laughter grew even louder. Some aliens were making gestures that were clearly meant to be insults. Others were talking among themselves, as if the human was not worth listening to. The Gorlick representative spoke up in a voice like grinding stone. Why should the Council waste time on a species that still uses primitive chemical rockets? Your people are thousands of years behind the rest of USA. Chitauri clicked loudly and said through the translation device, human technology is so basic they probably still use fossil fuels for energy. Their greatest achievement is barely reaching their own moon. The mockery continued for several minutes. Each species seemed to want to add their own insult or joke about human limitations. They talked about how humans were too slow, too weak, too stupid to ever amount to anything important in the galaxy. Through it all, Wu Jin just stood there, waiting. His smile never faded and his calm never broke. He seemed almost amused by their reaction, as if this was exactly what he had expected. Finally, when the laughter began to die down, he spoke again. "I understand the council has doubts about humanity," he said, his voice still calm and respectful. "That is understandable given what you think you know about Yuja." Paused and reached into his briefcase. "However," he continued, "I believe your opinions might change once you see what humanity has actually accomplished." The room grew quiet as curiosity began to replace mockery. What could this primitive human possibly show them that would be impressive? Wu Jin pulled out a small device that looked simple and ordinary compared to the advanced technology all around them. He placed it on the speaking platform and pressed a single button. Immediately, a holographic display appeared above the device, showing star charts and mathematical equations that made even the most advanced council members sit up and take notice. The chamber fell completely silent for the first time since the meeting began. "Let me show you," he said with that same small smile, "what happens when a species is not limited by the assumption that they already know everything." The tension in the Galaxy Council chamber was so thick it felt like the air itself had become heavy. Wu Jin stood calmly at the center of the room, surrounded by thousands of alien beings who had gone from laughing at him to hanging on his every word. The holographic displays still showed the impossible hyperspace routes and unlimited energy technology that had shaken their understanding of the universe before. "We continue," Wu Jin said, his voice carrying easily through the massive chamber. "I think it is important to address how humanity has been treated by this council over the past several months." He gestured, and the holographic display changed to show a timeline of events. The data was presented in simple, clear charts that everyone could understand. At the top were requests from other species and how quickly they had been approved. Below were human requests and the responses they had received when the Vortani requested expanded territory rights. Their application was approved in 6 hours, he said, pointing to the display. When the Chitauri needed emergency medical supplies for a plague outbreak, the council mobilized resources within 2 hours. When the Gorlick asked for mining rights in the Kepler system, they received immediate approval. The display scrolled down to show the human requests. Each one was marked with a red rejection stamp and a date showing how long it had been ignored. When Earth requested basic trading rights, we were told to prove our worth first. When we asked for colony permits for uninhabited worlds, we were told humans were too primitive to handle the responsibility. When we requested representation on the Council Science Committee, we were told our technology was too backwards to be useful. The silence in the chamber was deafening as the pattern became clear. Every other species received respect, consideration, and prompt responses. Humanity had been systematically dismissed, ignored, and treated as unworthy of basic courtesy. Speaker Veltar shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his silver skin seeming less bright than before. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "there were some oversights in how these requests were handled. The Council deals with many applications and sometimes oversights." Wu Jin interrupted gently. The word hung in the air like a challenge. "These were not oversights, Speaker Veltar. These were deliberate decisions based on your assumptions about human capabilities." The display changed again, showing voting records from council sessions. Every time a human request came up for consideration, it was rejected by overwhelming majorities. Often the votes happened so quickly that it was clear no one had even read the applications. The Gorlick representative, who was known for his species' rigid sense of honor, spoke up in his grinding stone voice. "We have acted without honor," he admitted. "The council has judged humanity based on prejudice rather than evidence. This brings shame to all our species." Several other council members nodded in agreement. The plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves in patterns that showed regret. The gas beings swirled in formations that indicated remorse. Even some of the smaller species that usually stayed quiet were making sounds of apology. But Wu Jin was not finished, yet he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a third device, this one slightly different from the others. When he placed it on the platform and activated it, the holographic display showed something that made half the council members stand up in shock. "This is a real-time feed from the Kepler 442 system," he announced calmly. "As you can see, humanity has established a thriving colony there, complete with agricultural domes, manufacturing facilities, and a population of over 50,000 people." The gasps that echoed through the chamber were so loud they could be heard over the translation devices. Kepler 442 was legendary in council records. It was a system that had defeated every attempt at colonization for over 2 centuries. The radiation levels alone should have killed any organic life within hours. This is impossible, stammered Speaker Veltar, his musical voice cracking with disbelief. The Vortani lost 3 colony ships trying to establish a foothold there. The radiation storms happen every few days. The atmospheric composition is toxic to most known life forms. The gravitational anomalies tear apart most structures. It would have been impossible, Wu Jin agreed, if we had tried to fight the environment. Instead, we learned to work with it. Human biology, it turns out, is remarkably adaptable. Through careful genetic therapy and environmental adaptation, we have not only survived in conditions that would kill most species, but actually thrived. The display zoomed in to show colonists working in radiation-resistant suits that looked almost like normal clothing. Children were playing in protective gear that seemed comfortable, and lightweight families were living normal lives in one of the most hostile environments in known space. The technology they were using was clearly advanced, but in ways that other species had never considered. Instead of massive protective shields, they used personal force fields instead of fighting the radiation. They had learned to use it as an energy source. Instead of avoiding the gravitational anomalies, they had learned to use them for manufacturing processes. But the real surprise, Wu Jin continued, is not that we have colonized one impossible world. The display shifted to show a map of human settlements, and the council chamber erupted in chaos. We have colonized 17 of them, he said calmly. The map showed human colonies on worlds that other species had written off as completely uninhabitable worlds with crushing gravity, where the air was made of poison gas, worlds where the temperature could melt most metals, worlds where the radiation was so intense it glowed in the dark, worlds where the storms were so violent they could tear apart mountains. Each colony was thriving. Each one had found ways to turn the hostile environment into advantages. The crushing gravity world was perfect for manufacturing super-strong materials. The poison gas world provided rare chemicals that were valuable throughout the galaxy. The radiation world powered itself from the very energy that should have killed everything on it. While you have been fighting over the few habitable worlds, Wu Jin explained, we have been making the uninhabitable ones livable. Every world you have rejected, every system you have abandoned, every corner of space you have deemed worthless, we have found a way to call it home. The implications were staggering. The human population was not the few billion confined to Earth that the Council had assumed. It was approaching 200 million, spread across 18 worlds, growing rapidly and expanding into territories that no one else wanted or could use. The chamber was completely silent. Now every being in the room was trying to process what they were seeing. A species they had dismissed as primitive had been quietly building an empire in the wastelands of space, using worlds that everyone else considered uninhabitable. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and no one had even noticed. Counselor Vex was the first to find his voice, his crystal body flickering with amazement. How long have you been expanding? He asked. The first colony outside Earth was established 8 years ago, Wu Jin replied. The most recent one was completed last month. We estimate that within 10 years we will have colonies in over 50 systems that no other species wanted or could use, but that were now home to millions of humans who were turning worthless worlds into thriving communities. The small human in the blue suit was no longer just a diplomat. He was the representative of a hidden galactic power that had been growing under their noses for almost a decade. The Galaxy Council chamber had never been so quiet in its 1,000-year history. Every alien being sat frozen in their seats, trying to understand what they had just learned. The small human diplomat had revealed that his species had been building a secret empire on worlds that everyone else thought were worthless. Speaker Veltar was the first to recover from the shock. His silver skin had lost much of its glow, and his musical voice was much quieter than before. What does humanity want from the Council now? He asked. Wu Jin smiled, and for the first time it was a completely genuine expression. The same thing we always wanted, he said. Fair treatment, equal representation, and the opportunity to contribute to galactic civilization. The only difference is that now we are asking as equals, not as supplicants. The word supplicants hit the chamber like a physical blow. It was exactly what the Council had treated humans as beings who should be grateful for any small consideration, beggars, asking for scraps from the table of advanced civilizations, but the power balance had completely shifted. The humans were no longer the ones asking for help. They had become too important to ignore and too powerful to dismiss. The political calculations were complex, but the reality was simple. Every species in the council was now trying to figure out how to benefit from association with humanity while avoiding the consequences of their earlier treatment. Counselor Thex spoke first, his crystal form pulsing with nervous energy. The Nexari would welcome humanity as full members of the council, he said. Your scientific achievements alone justify immediate recognition with voting rights equal to any other major species, the Gorlick representative rumbled his agreement, his stone body grinding as he leaned forward. We have acted without honor toward your people, he said in his grinding voice. The Gorlick formally apologized for our dismissive treatment. We would be honored to establish trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Other voices joined in, each species eager to align themselves with this newly revealed power. The insect-like Chitauri offered to share their manufacturing expertise. The plant-like Verdani proposed agricultural partnerships. The gas beings suggested joint research projects, but Wu Jin held up a hand for silence, and the entire chamber immediately went quiet. The gesture showed just how much the power dynamics had changed. A few hours ago, these beings had been laughing at him. Now they hung on his every word. I appreciate these offers, he said, but I think we need to address something more fundamental. The Council has spent centuries developing a system based on scarcity competition for limited resources. Has driven your politics, your economics, your entire way of thinking. He gestured to the holographic displays that still showed human colonies and technology. But what if scarcity is not necessary? What if there are enough resources for everyone? What if the things you fight over are actually abundant? The display changed to show detailed analysis of the worlds humans had colonized. The data was incredible. Each hostile world that other species had abandoned was rich in resources that were rare and valuable throughout the galaxy. The high-radiation world produced isotopes that were essential for advanced technology. The crushing gravity world created materials that were stronger than anything else known. The poison gas world generated rare chemicals that were worth more than precious metals, while you have been fighting over the same few dozen habitable worlds. Wu Jin explained, we have been harvesting resources from hundreds of worlds you considered worthless. We now have access to materials and energy sources that are in desperately short supply throughout the galaxy. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just found new places to live, they had found new sources of wealth that could change the entire galactic economy. The things that drove wars and political conflicts could become as common as air. But there was something else in Wu Jin's tone, something that made the council members shift nervously in their seats. He was not just offering partnership. He was subtly demonstrating that humanity no longer needed their approval for anything. We have been patient, he continued, hoping for acceptance and cooperation, but we are not dependent on your approval for our continued growth. Our colonies are self-sufficient, our technology is advancing rapidly, our population is expanding. The message was clear without being threatening. Humanity had moved beyond needing the council. They had become a galactic power, whether the council recognized it or not. The chamber buzzed with urgent whispers as representatives conferred with their delegations. Everyone was calculating advantages and disadvantages, trying to figure out how to position themselves in this new reality. Speaker Veltar looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of beings who had just realized they might have made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance. What would humanity require for full partnership with the council? He asked. Wu Jin considered the question carefully, as if he had not already prepared for this exact moment. Equal representation in all council decisions, he said. Equal access to all council resources and databases. Equal participation in all council projects and initiatives. He paused and looked directly at Speaker Veltar. And a formal apology from the council for the systematic discrimination humanity has faced. The word discrimination hung in the air like a challenge. It was exactly what had happened, but no one had wanted to say it out loud. The council had treated humans as inferior beings based on nothing more than prejudice and assumption. Several Council members looked uncomfortable, but they all knew it was true. The voting records were clear. The pattern of rejection was undeniable. The evidence was displayed right in front of them. The Nexari counselor Vex spoke first. We formally apologize for the discriminatory treatment humanity has received, he said, his crystal form flickering with what looked like shame. The Nexari acknowledged that our actions were based on prejudice rather than evidence. One by one other species added their voices to the apology. The Gorlek apologized for their dismissive attitude. The Chitauri acknowledged their insulting comments. The Verdani rustled their leaves in patterns that showed deep regret. Even speaker Veltar finally spoke, his beautiful voice heavy with reluctance. The Vortani acknowledged that we have failed in our duty to treat all species with equal respect. He said, we apologize for our arrogant behavior and our dismissive treatment of humanity. But Wujin was not finished, yet he reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a document that he placed on the platform. This is a proposed treaty between humanity and the Galaxy Council, he said. The terms are fair and reasonable, but they reflect the new reality of our relationship. The document appeared in the holographic display where everyone could read it. The terms were indeed fair, but they were also firm. Humanity would receive full council membership with voting rights equal to any major species. Human colonies would be recognized as sovereign territory. Human technology would be shared on a reciprocal basis. Only most importantly, the treaty included provisions for other species that had been dismissed or marginalized by the Council. Humanity was offering to sponsor smaller species to help them gain fair representation. The message was clear. Humanity was not just joining the existing power structure, they were changing it to be more fair and inclusive. The Council had a choice. They could accept humanity as an equal partner, or they could face the consequences of having a powerful neighbor who remembered how they had been treated. The small human in the blue suit had given them a way to save face while completely changing the balance of power in the galaxy. Now they had to decide whether to take it. The proposed treaty floated in the holographic display where every member of the Galaxy Council could read its terms. The document was written in clear, simple language that left no room for misunderstanding. Humanity was offering partnership, but on equal terms, not as the junior member begging for acceptance. Wu Jin stood quietly beside his devices, watching the faces of the council members as they read through the treaty terms. Their expressions showed a mixture of amazement, respect, and growing nervousness. They were beginning to understand that this was not just about adding one more species to the council. This was about changing how the entire galaxy operated. The treaty included provisions that would revolutionize galactic politics. Equal representation for all species regardless of their technological level or population size, shared access to resources and knowledge, fair treatment protocols that would prevent any species from being marginalized or discriminated against. But what made the council members most nervous were the clauses about mutual defense and economic cooperation. Humanity was offering to share their advanced technology, but only with species that signed on to the new fair treatment protocols. The implications were clear: join the new system and benefit from human innovations, stay with the old system and be left behind. Counselor Vex was the first to speak, his crystal form pulsing with excited light. These terms are more generous than we deserve, he said. Given how we have treated humanity, the Nexari vote to accept this treaty immediately. The Gorlek representative rumbled his agreement, his massive stone body leaning forward. Anna demands that we accept, he said in his grinding voice. The Gorlek have acted shamefully, and this treaty offers us a path to redemption, but not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. Speaker Veltar stood up, his silver skin shimmering with agitation. While we appreciate humanity's achievements, he said, his musical voice carrying a sharp edge, we must consider the implications of such dramatic changes to council structure. He gestured toward the holographic displays. Some of these proposals would overturn thousands of years of established precedent. The council has operated successfully for millennia. Why should we change everything now? The chamber fell silent as the real issue finally came into the open. It was not about whether humanity deserved equal treatment. It was about whether the established powers were willing to give up their advantages. Wu Jin had expected this resistance. He had studied each species carefully and knew that some would find it harder to accept change than others. The Vortani, in particular, had built their entire identity around being superior to other species because the old system is failing. He said simply. The holographic display changed to show statistics that made several council members gasp. The data showed economic decline, political instability, and increasing conflicts throughout the galaxy over the past century. Wars had become more frequent, resources were becoming scarcer, and entire species were falling into poverty. The current system creates competition for limited resources, Wu Jin explained, but we have shown that many resources are not actually limited. They just seem that way when you are stuck in old ways of thinking. The display showed the wealth that human colonies had generated from worlds that other species had considered worthless. The numbers were staggering. In just 8 years, humanity had created more new wealth than the entire council had generated in the previous century. Your system assumes that for one species to prosper, another must suffer, he continued, but that is only true when resources are truly limited. When resources are abundant, everyone can prosper. He gestured to the images of human colonies thriving on impossible worlds. These worlds were abandoned because you thought they were worthless, but they contain enough resources to supply the entire galaxy for thousands of years. The council members looked at each other with growing understanding. The human colonies were not just impressive achievements, they were proof that the entire foundation of galactic politics was built on a false assumption. Speaker Veltar shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence evaporating, but he was not ready to give up completely. Even if your colonies are successful, he said, that does not mean other species can duplicate your achievements. Human adaptability may be unique. Wu Jin smiled, that same mysterious smile he had worn throughout the meeting. That is exactly the kind of thinking that has held back galactic civilization for millennia. He said. The display changed to show detailed technical specifications for the environmental adaptation technology humans used in their colonies. The information was complex but clearly presented. Every piece of technology, every adaptation technique, every survival method was laid out in complete detail. We are not keeping this technology secret, he said. All of it is available to any species that joins the new partnership. Every world you have written off as uninhabitable could become home to billions of beings. All the resources you fight over could become as common as starlight. The offer was incredible. Humanity was willing to share the technology that had allowed them to colonize impossible worlds, the same innovations that had made them wealthy and powerful beyond imagination. But there was a catch. The technology would only be shared with species that agreed to the new fair treatment protocols. No more discrimination. No more assuming that some species were superior to others. No more systematic exclusion of anyone based on prejudice. The chamber buzzed with urgent conversations as representatives discussed the implications with their delegations. Some species were eager to accept immediately, others were more cautious, worrying about giving up their privileged positions. The smaller species that had been marginalized by the council were the most enthusiastic. The plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves in patterns that showed excitement, the gas being swirled in formations that indicated strong approval. Even some of the insect species that usually stayed quiet were making sounds of agreement. But the major powers were split. The Nexari and Gorlick seemed ready to accept the new system. The Chitauri were calculating advantages and disadvantages. The Vortani were clearly struggling with the idea of giving up their superior status. Finally, Speaker Veltar spoke again, his voice much quieter than before. The Vortani request time to consider these proposals. He said, such fundamental changes cannot be decided hastily. Wu Jin nodded, as if he had expected this response. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need, but I should mention that this offer has a time limit. The chamber went silent again as the implications sank in. Humanity is not standing still while you deliberate, he explained. We are continuing to expand our colonies, develop our technology, and establish our position in the galaxy. Every month that passes makes us stronger and more independent. He gestured to the displays showing human expansion plans. In 6 months, we will have colonies in 30 systems. In 1 year, we will have established trade relationships with species outside the Council. In 2 years, we may not need the Council at all. The message was clear. The Council could join humanity as partners now. or they could watch from the sidelines as humanity built a new galactic civilization without them. The small human in the blue suit had given them a generous offer, but it would not remain available forever. The choice was theirs, but they would have to make it soon. The silence in the Galaxy Council chamber stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Every alien being in the room was processing what they had just learned. The small human Diplomat had not just revealed that his species was more advanced than anyone had imagined. He had offered them a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Speaker Veltar looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of representatives who were struggling with the biggest decision in their species' history. His silver skin had lost most of its glow, and his musical voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. The Vortani withdraw our request for additional time, he said. We cannot afford to let pride override wisdom. The Vortani accept humanity as equals and agree to the proposed treaty. The words seemed to break a dam that had been holding back the flood of responses. Counselor Vex immediately stood up, his crystal form blazing with light. The Nexari formally accept the treaty and welcome humanity as full partners in galactic civilization. The massive Gorlick representative rumbled his agreement, his stone body grinding as he rose to his feet. Honor demands nothing less, he said. The Gorlick accept the treaty and pledge our support to the new systemone. By one other species added their voices. The Chitauri clicked their acceptance. The plant-like Verdani rustled their agreement. The gas beings swirled in patterns that showed enthusiastic support. Even the smallest species that had been ignored for centuries spoke up to support the new partnership, but the most significant moment came when the Council voted the measure to grant humanity full membership with equal representation and to accept the new fair treatment protocols. Passed by a vote of 847 to 12, with 23 abstentions. The chamber erupted in sounds that would have been impossible to translate just hours earlier. The musical trilling of the Vortani now sounded like celebration instead of mockery. The rumbling of the Gorlick carried notes of respect. The clicking of the Chitauri had become rhythmic applause. For the first time in council history, the assembled representatives of nearly 1,000 worlds stood to applaud as a new member was welcomed not as a junior partner, but as an equal. Wu Jin stood quietly in the center of the chamber, accepting the applause with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout the entire meeting. He had achieved something that seemed impossible. Just hours earlier, he had transformed humanity from the laughingstock of the galaxy into one of its most respected members. But more than that, he had changed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. As the applause finally died down, Wu Jin began to gather his devices and papers. The holographic displays flickered and disappeared, leaving only the memory of the incredible revelations they had shown. Before I leave, he said, there is one more thing I want to share with the council. He reached into his briefcase one final time and pulled out a small crystalline object that seemed to glow with its own inner light. When he placed it on the platform, it projected a simple message that appeared in the air above the chamber. This message was not in any alien language. It was in simple human writing that the translation devices converted for each species. The message read, "Thank you for giving us the chance to prove ourselves. We look forward to working together to build a better galaxy for all species." But there was something else below the main message, a smaller line of text that made several council members gasp when they read it. This presentation was prepared 6 months ago. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Humanity had not just developed these technologies recently, they had been planning this moment for months. They had known exactly how the council would react and had prepared. Accordingly, Wu Jin had not come to the council to ask for acceptance. He had come to offer it. The small human in the blue suit had played the entire situation perfectly. He had allowed the council to reveal their prejudices and assumptions. He had given them the chance to mock and dismiss humanity. He had let them dig themselves into a hole of their own making, and then he had offered them a ladder to climb out. Speaker Veltar stared at the message, his silver skin flickering with what might have been admiration or fear. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Since the day Earth first applied for council membership," Wu Jin replied. "We knew that some species would judge us based on appearances and assumptions, so we prepared to show rather than tell. We prepared to demonstrate rather than argue." He smiled that same mysterious smile that had never left his face. Humanity has learned that actions speak louder than words. When someone tells you that you are too primitive to accomplish something, the best response is to accomplish it anyway. Message was clear to everyone in the chamber. Humanity had not just proven their worth, they had proven their wisdom. They had understood galactic politics better than species who had been playing the game for millennia. As Wu Jin walked toward the exit, the chamber remained silent. Every being in the room was trying to process what they had witnessed, the transformation of galactic civilization in the space of a few hours, the elevation of a dismissed species to a position of respect and influence, the complete reversal of assumptions that had guided their thinking for centuries. But perhaps the most impressive thing was how smoothly it had all been accomplished. There had been no threats, no demands, no ultimatums, just a calm presentation of facts and a generous offer of partnership. The small human had left them speechless, not through aggression or arrogance, but through competence and wisdom. As the great doors of the chamber closed behind him, Wu Jin allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had accomplished his mission not just for humanity, but for every species that had ever been dismissed or marginalized. The new system would be fairer, more inclusive, more prosperous for everyone behind him. The Galaxy Council was already beginning to plan for a very different future. The age of assumption and prejudice was ending. The age of cooperation and mutual respect was beginning, and it had all started with one human diplomat who refused to accept that his species was inferior simply because others believed it to be true. The galaxy would never be the same. The Council had learned, perhaps too late, that underestimating humanity was the greatest mistake they could make, but they had also learned that humanity was generous enough to forgive past mistakes and wise enough to build a better future for everyone. The small human in the blue suit had indeed left them speechless, but he had also left them with hope.